Evening. I'm joined by two gentlemen. To my immediate right is Dr. Sunil Shah, election issues around the election and voting process, which we'll be talking about later on. But first, Surveyor, where does a voter go to complain? And of course, there'll be, cases of somebody who's disgruntled for one thing or the other. What does that voter do?
There are three provisions. One, they can go to any government officer who is responsible. The first one is IEBC. They have different offices all over the country, and electoral observers or something like that, they can complain to them. And this is where they can register that, look, we are not satisfied about such and such things. Any of the pre-election violence or anything like that will be covered by IEBC. Provision, the Constitution provides them to look into those things. After the election has been done, and if there are problems on those ones, it will be dealt in the official way.
Yeah, and of course the police as well is one of the...
Police is one of them,
one of those you can go
one
to
of the important aspects.
And also what we even saw with the case the other day, the integrity case on Uhuru and Ruto, and the High Court clarifying that if there are any disputes concerning the presidential race or the deputy vice presidency, that is dealt with by the Supreme Court, not the IEBC, not any other court, and the High Court then has its own mandate as well as the Magistrates Court. So those are just some of the avenues the complaints go to. Talk to us about the observers. We have election observers. There'll be local ones and international ones coming in. What's their role? To just watch, observe?
Exactly. The role is basically just to watch and watch objectively.
Right.
Again, I think we come back to this word all the time, objective. The whole elections are supposed to be very objective. And even maybe coming to this complaints, people also have to be civil. There are avenues for them. The IBC, the police, they can even convey their problem to the observers as well. But the observers actually are not supposed to be talking to the voters until as they are permitted by the presiding officer. And if there is an issue, I think the presiding officer will use their discretion and allow the observer to engage some of the voters as well. But the observer's job is basically to look at the performance of the election, the performance of IEBC, even the security agencies, how they actually doing their things as well, making sure, and even looking at the voters. Are the voters allowed to vote freely, fairly, peacefully, without any problems, without any hindrances? Is there any bribery going on? Is there any selling of the ballots? Is somebody voting more than once? And if you a lot of people, the disabled especially, and the elderly, they require to be assisted. They can take their own friend to be assisted.
Which is what the IBC advises us on training today, and they advise those who need help to actually come with their own people.
But that person can only assist once and one person. They cannot assist 100 people. Then there is something wrong. Obviously, the observers will pick that up immediately. And
so who do they report to? They're observing how the IBC is conducting itself, the officials, the police, the voters, the entire process. After they have observed, to whom does this information go to?
The IBC has a whole framework for observers. They even have a code of ethics for observers. As the observers are supposed to behave in a certain manner. But the final outcome of this is they give regular statements, press conferences on the performance of the whole electoral process. They also make a final report on how the actual elections, the counting, the tallying has actually performed. Is it very free? Is it fair? Is it without any hindrances? There are parameters that IBC has actually set, which the international and the domestic observers have to follow. Normally, most of the observers also work hand in hand. They exchange a lot of this information. It's also good to identify potential hotspots as well. So we know exactly, what is perhaps going to happen in those areas, and try and act as a deterrent as well, because the observer's main role is to act as a deterrent from electoral malpractices. And I think if we have sufficient number of observers around, and at the end of the day, even the voters are supposed to be observers. If they can go and complain to IBC, they're actually looking at the process as well. And if there's something wrong, they can complain. The observers also make recommendations after the election process is all over, and even the petitions. and say how can the electoral process be improved for the future.
All right, thank you. Surveyor, in the past, the elections as they've been conducted here in the country, for one to be declared president, to win an election as president of Kenya, it has really been about the majority votes. But that is not the case under the Constitution, the 2010 Constitution. It's different. If you'd break that down for us.
Thank you, Sophia. You know, I think in our 50 year of independence, I think this is a jubilee year. Not think it is definitely
it
a
is.
jubilee. But if you see a president, how is a president declared? First of all, he must get a majority of 50% plus one vote. So that's why I'm saying every voter is an important person. You know, 50% plus one.
Plus one.
Okay. On top of that, he must get 24 counties having 25% of the voting. What will happen with that is that, you know, we have 47 counties. And if we have 24, that is more than 50%.
Right.
And even if he gets 50% and he doesn't cover the other one, then that is not eligible. And then we say runoff. I find that word very funny, runoff, but it's a rerun, meaning that then it has to be done within 30 days.
That is if that is not meant. 50% plus one is not meant in the 24 constituencies. That does not happen, then it forces a runoff.
Runoff. And in runoff, whoever comes with a majority will be declared a president.
All right. Yeah. Do you think this is a system that was, you know, put in there to ensure that whoever becomes president is in fact the one that majority, the Kenyans' voice being heard very clearly?
It's not just a simple majority, and that's why it's 50%,
plus one, of course,
and then the spread of that vote widely over the different diverse communities of Kenya. So there has to be a broad-based support for that president. Then only the president has a legitimacy. People can actually own up to that president as well and say, fine, we will work with this president.
All right.
If he comes just from one, say, in the past, we had these tribal blocks, we had strongholds for different political parties, and they have tended to rely only on that. One classic example, I think, is for Nairobi, Embakasi. We have 400,000 voters, and that's the total of Nairobi is 1.7. So if anybody really wants to win the election, then they will target Embakasi first before they target other places. But that shouldn't work because the vote has to be spread out very nicely.
Then and it is a tall order for any of these presidential candidates, because we've been seeing the latest polls, at least even bringing or pitting the two leading candidates neck and neck almost. So it's a tall order. Do we see a runoff? Likely.
Right now, I think the way things are, and we're talking of 45, 47%, it's not even reached 50%.
Right.
So definitely, the way things are, it looks as if we are headed for a runoff. In most runoffs, runoffs have always not relied on the trend that had been there in the actual election. It can change, you know, the runner-up can be the winner, and that has been the trend world over. What needs to happen is, it's only the two candidates, the winner and the runner-up, the second one, who actually participate in the runoff elections. The rest of the candidates, they either just go on the side, or they can actually tell their supporters who to support. That is allowed. And in that case, then it's a simple majority. So whoever has the highest number of votes comes through. Tricky affair again, but I think this has been required because, as you say, that we do not want a leader because of a support of a particular community or a particular block or a region that only supports him. Then what happens is when he becomes president, he only supports or does things for that particular.
And everybody else feels left out. Finally, gentlemen, as we wind up the show, let's go through the voting process. So there's a voter who's woken up bright and early, excited to participate. Of course, one that's registered, that's a given. If you're not registered, you cannot. If you did not register during the registration period, you cannot participate in the election. So there's one registered voter. Let's now go through how does the process work? Let's break it down.
Yes, it's interesting, and I think it's very important viewers to actually know what happens. 6 o'clock, the polling station opens. Obviously, when you walk in there, the materials have to be there, the electoral materials. That includes the ballot boxes, the ballot papers, the rubber stamps, and the ink and everything else. And the observers will also be looking at that. Are all the materials present at that time?
Yes.
Is the polling station opening at 6 a.m. or is it opening a bit later?
Yes, and to cut you short, Savra, you were saying something earlier about the same on the papers matching the leads of
Yes.
the ballot boxes.
You know, there will be 6 ballot papers.
Yes.
And there will be 6 boxes. Like, for example, if you take for the president, it will be white. If you take for the MPs, it will be green. So even people who are not very educated, it will be very clear. And the process will be, there will be 3 registration officers after going through all the procedure. They will be giving 2 ballot papers. And they will say for the president and for the governor, for example. Then they will go for that, they put that in the right boxes. And they have a right, in case they make a mistake, they can go back and say that, look, this paper was, was not the way I wanted it. Can you please give me another one? That is, I think it's provided in the provision of the law. And it's a common sense in a law that people are very ready to see by color-wise and put these 6 ballot boxes into this.
Okay, but there's a clarification. As much as you may go for a second ballot paper, in case you made an error on the one given earlier, something has to happen?
You have to return the other ballot back, and that has to be kept aside as a spoiled ballot by the electoral officers. But even this time, what IEBC has done, they also have a queuing clerk outside who make sure that all the voters are organized in a proper line, and they're moving very well. The first clerk will actually look at your ID card and make sure that you are the same person. He looks at the last finger, the little finger, and make sure that there is no ink where you might have actually gone and cast your vote and you are trying to cast again. So that will not be allowed. So that's the first check. Then there is the second check, which is obviously people who have registered through the BVR. The fingerprints are now on the system, and they'll be checked through the fingerprints and also through the face, the biometrics. So if that matches, automatically the system comes up and says, yes, so-and-so person is here in front of you. And if that is the same person on the ID card, then the voter actually moves to the third clerk who gives the 2 ballots, the fourth clerk who gives the next 2 ballots, the fifth clerk who gives the next 2 ballots. Then the voter has to go, there'll be these special booths where you can actually decide who to vote for and you make your marks. And it's very important to put your mark within the box provided.
Right.
And there are 2 marks only. One is a tick, the other one can be a cross.
Yes.
But not both on the same ballot. You only put one of the marks against the preferred candidate.
Because some people get it wrong and tick on the preferred candidate and then, cancel out on the other.
There was a, I think there is a documentary or something that you had yesterday where they were saying, no, the candidates you don't like, you put crosses.
No.
And the one you like, you put a tick.
Yes.
No, that is not the way. You just put one mark against that and within the box. I think some of the posters of IEBC also show a fingerprint. I think there will be very few people who will actually want to do a fingerprint. The reason being, it also doesn't ensure that it will be within the box, because you always, try and put it, it might go over the line.
Right.
Then it can be a disputed vote because it's not certain who you're actually voting for, but it could become a rejected vote.
A rejected vote. So there's rejected, disputed, and valid.
And spoiled.
And spoiled.
Yeah.
And spoiled.
All right. And I remember, as I mentioned earlier, training earlier, and what they said is that, so the polling stations open at 6, but if it opens later than 6, then they will make up for that at the end of voting.
Very true.
And of course that people, after they voted, they leave and go home, wait for the results. No surrounding the polling stations and watching and observing. And but your final thoughts, what would you tell Kenyans, those watching you right now, as we head to the elections? What are your last words of wisdom?
I think the only thing is we must remember Kenya is a beautiful country.
Yes.
And those, most of us has traveled overseas, we are an eye to other places in Africa.
Right.
If you take the example of president and prime minister, other countries followed this system. and we were an example. Kenya is one Kenya, we are one people. Let's do it very peacefully and look for the person we want to elect, but do it peacefully.
Do it peacefully. Thank you very much.
I think the most important thing is vote objectively based on issues. Do not be led by emotions, by tribal votes or by any favoritism, or because you think that that person is going to solve your personal problem. No, let us look after national interests. I think Kenyans have actually matured, and I think let's show to the whole world that we can vote very freely, fairly, and with our minds. And I think that's the most important thing that Kenyans can do. That's our responsibility. Let's just fulfill that, and let's have the best election that we ever had.
Yes.
And let's show to the world that, look, no matter what other problems we have done this, and we promise that we will do it.
We'll do it, and do it well, and we do hope for a peaceful, great election, and the people's voice will be heard. Dr. Sunil Shah, a surveyor, thank you very much for joining us this evening, for your thoughts, deep insights on this.
Thank you.
We hope to have you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, our viewers, for joining us this evening. Of course, the election countdown continues. It's just a few more days to go. 4th of March is just around the corner. Remember, KTN is your election channel. I'm Sophia Wanuna. Have a good night.